Morning, gang. It is December 1st of 2016, and I'm sure you've seen videos on this Mustang that I've been working on. If you haven't, check them out. But I've talked about the problem I have with the rear end differential. This has a forward 9-inch under it, and from what I understand, it's from a late 50s, like Mercury station wagon or something. And apparently the width between the backing plates is narrower by an inch or so. That's what I've been told. I can't verify that without measuring it, and I may do that. But the problem is with this 9-inch, somebody has modified it, and I believe there's a mini-spool in the differential. And that's great if you're drag racing, but this car is not going to get raced. And to make it a drivable car, I'm going to have to undo all that. So the plan for today is to try to get the differential out. So I'm going to try to go through those steps. Being it's a Ford, it's not going to have C-clips like a Chevy. It's going to have bolt-in axles. So I'm going to jack it up and get some jack stands under it just for clearance, and then remove the wheels and work my way in towards the center of the car or the differential, and see if I can't get set up and show you some of that. I have the car jacked up and sitting on jack stands, and the jack stands are mounted near the front perch for the leaf springs. And here's a fuel line right here on the driver's side, so make sure you don't hit that. But that's a good point right there. That allows the springs to extend and lower the housing. But here I found this interesting. That's a spacer. So the idea that this is a narrow rear end has to be true. I will do a measurement and see what it comes up to, but there's a spacer on each side, and even though I had set these wheels that I have on here, I guess I didn't notice that before. And that's a pretty good size spacer. So let me do some measuring and I'll see what I can come up with. But I would definitely say this is a narrow or narrower differential. Well, I've pulled out the tape, and basically I'm looking at somewhere around 51 inches. If I'm reading it right. I know that it's hard to get an exact measurement. I don't know what the original housings are, but that's the measurement on this one. So now what I'll do is I'll remove these adapters so I can get the drum off, and then get a look at the bolts on the inside to hold the axle to the housing. I've already removed the adapter that I had. Take the drum off. And I'm sure this isn't what came in this car. This is looks like a much bigger drum than what would have been on the Mustang. And now there's 4 bolts, or 4 posts sticking out from the backing plate, and there are 4 would have 4 9/16 nuts. Now I've already removed 3 of these, and I'll remove the 4th one. And that's what this hole is for right here. Go through the axle. Okay, so it's going to take a little bit of effort to get this axle out. The GM with the GM axles with a C-clip, once you remove that C-clip, the axle will slide out freely. This one is a little bit different. It's kind of held in with the bearing. And so what I'm going to do is use this. And this is a slide hammer kit that I picked up from Harbor Freight. You can see right there. And that's what this particular tool right here is meant for. What happens is you bolt this on, use the lug nuts to hold it in place, and then the end of this will thread into that, and you can use the slide hammer action to pull it out. So let me get that bolted on there, and I'll show you how it works. And there it is installed. And basically just hold on to it, take your slide hammer, slide it back, and that's it. Now the axle is released from the housing, and I will repeat this on the other side and get the other axle out of the way, and then I can go towards removing the actual differential. So I'm under the vehicle now, and there's a series of nuts around the perimeter of the differential that are 9/16, so I'll remove those. And what somebody has told me is whenever you want to determine if you have a 9-inch for sure or not, is this bottom one right here. because you can't get on it with a socket apparently, and it's behind the housing slightly. I mean, you probably get it, you probably could, but that's kind of the giveaway in this one here. It's more behind the housing. That's what I've been told, so that's all I have to go by. So what I'm going to do is remove those bolts. I'll do all the bottom ones first, and then get that top one out and try to get a jack underneath there to support this and bring it forward and let it come down. I'm not sure I can film all that while I'm doing it, but we'll see. Well, I got it out. I did not use the jack. I found it was easier to use my wheel dolly here and just kind of pull it out and let it fall into it. Looks like everything's in great shape. The gears themselves look like they're really nice. It's not showing a lot of wear. There's the pinion gear in there. Now, I haven't determined the gear ratio just yet, but it has a spool. As you can see, the splines go straight across. So, that's going to have to come out. And I guess I'll have to do a little more research and come up with some spider gears to put in there so that it is more drivable. Okay, so this is a new experience for me. I haven't done a lot on differentials, but from what I've seen online, the 9-inch seems to be fairly simple. So what I've done is I've removed or loosened these bolts right here. These are 3/4 inch, and I've taken those loose, and from what I've seen, and I'll turn it to the side here a little bit, is when you take off this cap, it has this tab here, right there, and that's a lock tab. And from my understanding, you know, this end piece here is threaded, and you can adjust it left and right between the two till you get it set where you need it, so that it lines up properly, the ring gear to the pinion. And then when you put the cap and lock it in place, this is what holds it from turning. So I'm going to take these back off. And when those are out of the way, well, you can see there, that's the threaded piece. It's got threads that interact with the cap and with the housing. So I'll take that off as well. This one, you can see it'll slide up and out, and there you can see the threads. And then you've got the bearing races, and there's a part number on these, and it's particular to this model. Let's say this is a 28 spline, and this says LM501310. So if you're looking to replace them, you want to obviously go back with the same part number. So at this point, I can lift the center section out. And now what I'm going to do, because I know it has that spline or that mini spool in it, I want to remove that. So to do that, I have to take these bolts out. So I'm going to loosen those up, and we're going to get to see what's inside. What I've done is I've taken all these bolts loose. These were 5/8 head, and you can see they have a washer on them. So those are all loose. I'm going to just get those out of the way. And I also took a screwdriver and I scribed from one location here, from the edge to each one of these pieces, so that just in case, I don't think it really matters, but now I know where they line up, so I put it back together. The gear feels like it's a little bit pressed on, so I've just been kind of tapping on it, and now I've separated it. So I can set the gear aside, and I've got the pin here in the center that is holding the mini spool in place. I look, and there is a retainer right here, and that's going to be pressed out as well. You can see it comes all the way through here. So what I'll do is I'll set this up like this. I'm going to get a punch and drive that pin out that direction. So I have a punch here. I'm not sure what size. This one 3/16. And I'm going to go against the back side of that pin drive it all the way out. And there it is. And you can see that's a split pin. Hopefully you can see that. And sorry the battery died on the camera. I was trying to show you this is a split pin, and it's kind of like a spring action that holds it in place. So now that pin is out, I'm going to drive out the center pin that holds everything together. And you can see there's the hole where that split pin goes through. So that's all good. Set that aside. And then I need to separate these two halves. And I think the easiest way to do it is to take a screwdriver, nothing complicated, and I'm going to wedge it between the two halves. That looks simple enough. I'll stand it back up so it don't lose any pieces. And there's the two halves. This would be your surface where your spider gears and everything would interact. That all looks fine. And there is the mini spool. And it looks really nice, but I don't need it. It won't work for this application. So at this point, now that I've got that apart, I will look over this inside, clean it up, make sure there's nothing damaged. It looks like it's just crusty, and I'll go from there. I think I found there are some a set of spider gears available from Summit. I think it's a Motive brand. I'll have to double check that. Yeah, there's just some crusty stuff in there, and that'll all just clean up okay. But anyway, I think the gear set, which I don't have yet, but I'll get the part number, is like $99. And so I'll get that and put it back in here, get everything bolted together, and I'll try to find torque specs and all that sort of thing to give you some information. And that'll be it. Once I get that all back together, then I'll try to go through the sequence of reassembly, and again, I'll get some more information on that as I go. Okay, I'm going to give you some information here, and this is just general information, but as you can see, I've cleaned up the two halves. I've cleaned up a variety of things: the gear itself, the main ring gear, the end caps, the retainer nuts, all these different pieces that make up this differential. In the process, I found this information. And you can see that casting says bore 4025A. It also says it on this half here. This says 4026A. Now what I found is I went online, and I'll post the links in my comment section when I get to that point. But apparently this differential is from a 57 to 60 Ford or Mercury product, and it's not nodular iron, which some people they consider that more or less desirable. They want the nodular iron more so. And from the reviews I've read, it's good and bad on this particular differential, but it doesn't matter to me. It's not cracked. It'll work for what I'm doing, and I'm just going to drive on. So here I go. I went to Summit, and I picked up this kit here. And this is the internals, and there's the part number, and it was $99.97. So when you get the kit and open it up, you'll find a set of 4 gears. The main drive gears that go on the axle, and I guess you would call them the spider gears, plus a center shaft. It also came with a new retaining pin and the shims. And I'll show you how I'm going to put those in there in just a minute. A couple other things. What I did is once I got everything cleaned up, I went over the edge of this flat with a file, because when as you're taking it apart, you could create a burr, and that is one thing that happened here. I think there was some previous indications where it had been apart, and they didn't clean that up. So I went over that surface. So everything looks like it's in good shape. I did have some index marks. I talked about indexing, but really, I think I talked about indexing. Really, you can't put them on wrong because you have that pin right there, and there's the hole right there, and that's the alignment when you get those set up. Sorry, that's where that spring pin goes back in. So at this point, let me get the camera set up. I'm going to show you the sequence of what I'm going to do. But basically, they call out for once you put the gears in, I'll use the bolts from the ring gear, and I will squeeze everything together. Now they say don't torque it yet. The idea is to get this pinch fit here and on this flange to come together, because then you come back and you'll do the torque. So let me get set up and start getting things together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of gear oil on this shim. Run that around there so it's got some lubrication on it before it ever goes into the assembly. And I'm going to put a little bit onto the drive gear as well. I'm going to drop that in place. That turns nice. Then I think it has a little bit of oil left in this from the shipping, but I'll put a little bit inside of there, and also on the shim that goes behind it. So get that in place, and I've got the pin set up. Just got to get the alignment right. There we go. That's coming through. And I'll repeat the process for the other side. This is a new experience for me as well. I think I have to mention that earlier. And I'm not afraid to try anything, really, when it comes to working on stuff. And hopefully this encourages you that you can do it as well. Okay, with that in place, I'll put some on the back side of this gear. Set it up in place. Put a little bit more on that shim. And then set those two together. You might have to play with it a little bit. Didn't quite get it lined up. There it is. And now the idea, and you can see it actually squeezed together fairly nice. May not even have to do that other thing I was talking about, but it says to take the, or what I've seen online is I'm going to take the gear, set it in place, set the center section in, and then I'll take the bolts and get everything lined up, and use the bolts to squeeze everything together. So let me check my alignment on that, and then I'll start tightening up those bolts. I just had to do a little bit of shifting to make sure the alignment was right. But at this point, all I'm going to do is snug down these bolts gently in a crisscross pattern.
and that'll pull everything together. Once everything's in position, I'll go back and I will put red Loctite on these bolts. And I've also looked up some torque specs. Now, this is just for reference. I'll say that. I mean, when you open one of these up, you might have different, different model, but I'm sure they're all very similar. But basically, my ring gear is going to torque at 65 foot-pounds, and so I'll do that in kind of like in a 2-sequence type of thing. I'll snug it down to probably 30 or 35 in a crisscross pattern, like I was saying, and then I will do a final torque of 65. So you get the idea here. Everything will squeeze together, and let me finish doing that, and I'll do the other part, which is basically installing this spring pin. Alright, so I've just had these bolts snug and squeezed everything together. I've checked the alignment of that pin that holds the center pin, and now I'm going to try to put in this spring clip or spring pin, and these can be a little tricky. You may want to use a brass hammer, that'll help too. And now I'll take a punch and drive it the rest of the way in. And that's coming through the other side. Okay, I'll finish that up, but at this point what I will do is take these bolts back out and put on my red Loctite and then torque it. Now I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to torque this yet, because it calls for 65 foot-pounds, and as you can tell, I mean, it's just a big chunk of metal. It's going to roll around pretty easy, so I'm going to have to come up with some way to hold this thing still so I can do that torque. Here's what I decided to do. I loosely assembled everything, and the reason I did that is I could use the gearing to prevent this center section from turning. And as you can see, I've clamped it in my vise, and then I have a bar going through the U-bolts where, of course, the U-joint for the drive shaft would normally connect. So what that'll do is that'll allow this to bind as I put a load on each one of these bolts. Now, again, I said I'm going to torque to 30 foot-pounds and then come back and do 65. At this point, I'm going to take a few of these out at a time, and I'll mark them so that I know which one's which, and then I will add my red thread locker and start doing my torquing sequence. I've got the thread lock on the bolts. I've set my torque wrench to 30 foot-pounds, and what I'm going to do is kind of a sequence where I'm going to start with number 1. I've numbered these. We start with number 1, and then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and that third bolt on that count will be on my next one in the sequence. I'll continue to do that as I go around until I get to my final number. So I'll go through those and go around and make sure I get all of them to the 30 foot-pounds, and then I'll go back and repeat this at 65 foot-pounds. Well, this system seemed to work pretty good. I can now double check all these and make sure they're right on the money at 65. And they are. I think that was a simple solution. And now the next part will be setting up the load or preload on these bearings this way. So as you can see, I've taken the center section back out of the carrier. I only had that assembled loosely so that I could take care of those torques. But I'm going to show you a couple things, and I've found these from, there's some obviously some other YouTube people who make videos and show you these things, and I've seen some good information, and I've also found some different information on some websites. But I'll show you how this works. This is your, let's say, retainer nut. That's your race for your bearing, and then there will be another set over here. So basically you put this retainer nut in, and you got to make sure it's in the grooves properly so that it can rotate and do its job. Then you set in the bearing race, and then I will slip in, I should say, I'll put the race on the end of the bearing and then slip it in like that. Put the other one in and get the other nut in place. Now this rotation is critical because you can adjust these left and right, and that affects your lash or the interaction between the ring gear and the pinion. So with those in place, and this is, again, this is information that I found available online. I'm going to try to show you how this works. Basically, if you turn both of these at the same time in one direction, you get a lot more play. And then you bring them back the other way, you get less play. You can see, you can hopefully hear that. Now see, that's like zero play. Now from what I've read, and because I'm using an original or a used set of gears, basically, I need about 10 thousandths lash between the ring gear and a pinion. And what that means is how much play there is on contact. You could be able to move it just a little bit. So when you hear that movement, that's what that is. That's the lash. And so basically you want 10 thousandths. Well, prior to that, you have to put a preload on these bearings. And so what that means is you can turn this, turns really easily, and you adjust these in until you get a little bit of load on those bearings, and it slows down the rotation. Now, I'm not a professional at this, so I'm only going by the information that I have found. But having worked with bearings and stuff before, I kind of have a feel for it. So there's that. I can feel that it's got a little bit of a load on those bearings. And that feels pretty good. It's a little bit harder to turn, but not difficult. Okay, so at that point, I would take these bearing caps and put those on top and make sure that they also line up with the, or fit the grooves in those retainer nuts. Now, according to what I found, again, these torque to 80 foot-pounds. But what I would do is put a preload on the bearings, torque these to 40, and then adjust so I can get my lash, which is supposed to be 10 thousandths. And then, when I'm happy with it, I will torque these down to 80, and then install these retainers on the nuts on the side. Now, that's another thing. I want to show you this. Hopefully I can give you some detail. Whoops. You can see all these little slots. And normally you take like a spanner tool, which looks like a, I don't know, kind of like a pair of pliers with a couple ears on it. And you can rotate like that. Well, I just made my own. Since I'm not doing this every day, I don't need to go out and spend the money on a tool. I can make one and it'll do the same thing. Pretty simple and effective. So let me get some stuff in place and see if I can't try to get closer to finishing this up. So at this point, I have things set up so that I can do the lash adjustment. I took that same bar and I put it through the U-bolts and pinned it basically into the jack so it can't rotate. I've got my buddy's dial indicator set up, magnetic base and arm, and basically I have a little bit of spring tension on this so that you can set the zero easier.
and there's 0, and basically there is the other contact. You can kind of hear it, and that's at 22 thousandths. So basically I'm looking for 10 or around 10, and what I've learned is each one of these holes, if you make one rotation, represents 5 thousandths or 0.005. So in essence I need to rotate this one clockwise and go that direction, and rotate this one counterclockwise to relieve tension on it and move the assembly that direction. So I'll set up my little tool that I made and make those adjustments. So if each one is 5, I'll back this one off 2 holes. So there's 1, and basically that's 2 right there. And then move this one 2 holes. So there's 1, and that's 2. So now let's see what it shows. Reset this to 0 with a little bit of pressure on, holding against the gear, and that's showing about 16. So I'm going to do one more hole. And one more hole. Reset my 0. So I'm at 12. So I'll do a little bit more adjusting and get that down to the 10 that I want, and then I will double check my torque on these caps, make sure they're at 80 foot-pounds, and also put the retainers on to hold the ring from turning, and those are supposed to be 20 foot-pounds, and I'll make sure to put some Loctite on those as well. So let me get that finished up and we'll have one more look. I've made my adjustments, and I'll just show you where I'm at here. There's 0, and right at about 9, and I think I'm okay with that. I know it calls for about 10 thousandths, but I think I'm okay with 9. Now at this point I will double check my torques, 80 foot-pounds here on these, and then the retainers are 20 foot-pounds, and I have to make sure those are lined up so they do their job, and also put some I will put some Loctite on those. And there's one more step that they call for, and basically it indicates how your gears interact, the ring gear to the pinion gear, and they call for this compound that you put on here, and I can't think of the name. I'll label it when I get make the video or put the video on YouTube. But basically what it does is it shows the pattern of how the gears interact. Now this is more critical, I would say, when you're building a new assembly. I'm not building a new assembly. All I did was take it apart and remove that mini-spool. So this video is more about taking this out and making this more of a standard differential. I will, however, I don't have any of that compound, but I will put some. I'm going to use some grease and put on here and rotate it through and get a look at that and make sure that the pattern looks pretty decent. So let me try that and I'll show how that turns out. Everything's locked in, and I want to show you I'm using some high temp red wheel bearing grease, and I haven't rotated anything just yet. Let's see if I can show you how this works out. Just rotating it through. And it looks like the pattern is very consistent on those teeth. So again, I'm happy with that. And overall, this has been a good learning experience. I've never taken one of these apart this far. I've done other repairs. I think I did a video on a spider gears in a GM doing a Suburban. But this is the first time I've ever gone this deep into any kind of differential. So I'm always open to learning and experiencing new stuff, and this is a good one. So I hope that y'all learned something from this. I know I have. And at this point, I'm going to finish up this video because other than having to drain the rest of the gear oil out of the housing, I will check my bearings on each axle and the seals. If I need to do anything with those, I will. I think they're fine. Obviously somebody's been into this before and probably replaced this stuff, but I will double check that. And then at that point I'll reassemble everything, get the differential back in the housing, put my axles in, reseal all this, put it all back together, and be done with it. Now again, this video is only dealing with the fact that I was replacing, or should I say removing, this mini spool. This is not a rebuild. This is not a how-to so much as something I had to do to try to make this differential work for me. One other thing, this I did count off the teeth. There are 10 on the pinion and there are 31 on the ring gear, so that makes this a 310 differential. That's fine with me. Again, it's not a race car. I'd like to have like 323, something like that, but 310 will be fine. And so yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video, and I will reassemble everything and test fit my drive shaft, clean it up, get some paint on it if everything works out well, and that should take care of this video. So as always, thanks for watching.